strength, and calmly every danger brave. Guide thee to a better home, and lead to victory o'er the grave. Take up thy cross and follow Christ, nor think till death to lay it down. For only he who bears the cross may hope to wear the glorious crown. To thee, great Lord, the one in three, all praise forevermore ascend. O grant us in our home to see the heavenly life that knows no end. Please be seated. Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" They answered, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, others one of the prophets." "And you," he asked, "who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." Then he gave them strict orders not to tell anyone about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man had to endure great suffering and to be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, to be put to death, and to rise again 3 days afterwards. He spoke about it plainly. At this, Peter took hold of him and began to rebuke him. But Jesus, turning and looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter. "Out of my sight, Satan," he said. "You think as men think, not as God thinks." Then he called the people to him, as well as his disciples, and said to them, "Anyone who wants to be a follower of mine must renounce self. He must take up his cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and for the gospel's will save it. What does anyone gain by winning the whole world at the cost of his life? What can he give to buy his life back? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this wicked and godless age, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." We're very familiar with these words and the words about how to succeed, how to be the greatest. And it isn't difficult for our heads to understand this. It chimes well with my 1950s childhood, where you weren't supposed to blow your own trumpet, echoing perhaps the Victorian virtue of knowing your place. seeing the ignominy of the cross as somehow a victory is central to our faith. The message of the cross is sheer folly to those on the way to destruction, but to us who are on the way to salvation, it is the power of God. Celebrating the resurrection on Easter Day won't come as a surprise to us. But for the disciples, Jesus' life on earth had ended in failure. We can't look at the cross without that reassurance that it's almost Easter. And although it's only the day after tomorrow, that actually isn't a shortcut to Easter. We have to go through the valley of the shadow of death. And the difficulty is in living this. As university chaplain, I made a point of spending some time with the porters. But I actually know that I gave more deference to the Vice-Chancellor. I know that my default position is to observe hierarchy. So this idea in Mark's Gospel challenges the assumptions behind this behavior. The trouble with assumptions is that you don't know you're making them. They'd be choices otherwise. Sometimes when I stand in a pulpit, I find that I'm saying things that I need to hear. If I'm lucky, it can be something that captures the experience of those who are listening. But I find it hard to accept thanks for something that I have done that clearly evokes gratitude in someone else. The words, "it was nothing," or anyone would have done the same, easily trip off my lips. I used to say, it's the least that I could do, but I stopped that several years ago, having heard Jasper Carrott, the comedian, saying that he'd said that to a friend. And his friend responded, "But I'm your friend. Couldn't you do more than just your least?" Belittling what I have done can mean that I belittle the gratitude that is being shown. I do, though, find it hard to acknowledge and then express the feeling that I have been a channel that God has been able to work through. It's easy to get competitive about modesty, and in my head to become quite accomplished at modesty, without, of course, boasting about it to anyone else. Where does this idea of losing your life take you? Where does the argument that the disciples have about who is the greatest take you? What assumptions about greatness have embedded themselves into your thinking? Where then will the next few minutes of silence take you? dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. I hope that chant can enter into you and you breathe through it, not least because it's going to be repeated several times during this 3 hours. But I think the sentiment is very powerful. I now want you to imagine a 12-year-old boy working as a drug courier in a county lines operation, trying to help out his mother, whose benefits have been stopped, despite her struggles with her acute mental health. Can he see you looking at him? Do you talk to him? What does he say to you? Can you see the Son of Man in him? How do you feel as you hold this image in the silence that follows? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Jesus came with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, "Sit here a while I go over there to pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee. Distress and anguish overwhelmed him. And he said to them, "My heart is ready to break with grief. Stop here and stay awake with me." Then he went on a little farther, threw himself down and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass me by. Yet not my will, but yours." He came back to the disciples and found them asleep. And he said to Peter, "What? Could none of you stay awake with me for 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may be spared the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to pass by without my drinking it, your will be done." He came again and found them asleep, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away again and prayed a 3rd time, using the same words as before. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Still asleep, still resting? The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let us go. The traitor is upon us." I've always found this story of Jesus praying and his disciples sleeping very powerful. There's none of the physical pain of the cross here, so more opportunity for him to experience his isolation. I don't know what that's about, whether the pain of the cross is so acute and beyond anything I can imagine or any pain that I have experienced, or whether I can't face looking at that pain, or whether it's because I've had some experience of isolation, that somehow this passage I find very powerful indeed. The disciples don't engage. They keep falling asleep. The experience of isolation is a common human experience. We need support, but it's not there. The disciples can't do anything to change the course of events. That powerlessness is very draining and discouraging. Now, I'm in a privileged position when somebody dies because there is something that I can do. I can conduct the funeral if I am asked. But when somebody dies, people frequently say, "Is there anything I can do?" Generally, there isn't. And anyway, someone who is recently bereaved isn't always best placed to take on a managerial role. What is hard, perhaps harder, is to stay with that powerlessness, where there is nothing that you can do. A GP colleague of mine turned a well-known phrase on its head in the advice that he gave to medical students. Don't just do something, stand there. Like anyone who is suffering, Jesus doesn't need advice. He needs the supportive presence of those who care. And in this, his disciples fail him. They don't even walk with him in his isolation. Here are some more words of Richard Rohr to encourage us in the use of the silence that follows. It's always an act of faith to trust silence, because it is the strangest combination of you and not you of all. It is deep, quiet conviction, which you are not able to prove to anyone else. You have no need to prove it, because the knowing is so simple and clear. Silence is both humble in itself and humbling to the recipient. Silence is often a momentary revelation of your deepest self, your true self, and yet a self that you do not yet know. Spiritual knowing is from a God beyond you and a God that you do not yet fully know. The question is always the same. How do you let them both operate as one and trust them as yourself? Such brazenness is precisely the meaning of faith, and why faith is still somewhat rare compared to religion. The ego gets what it wants with words. The soul finds what it needs in silence. The silence, as we see where the isolation of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane takes us. never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Now I offer you another image. An emaciated widow on her 3-day journey to Addis Ababa with 4 children under 5. She's watched her last cow die in the drought that Ethiopia is experiencing. Is she saying something to you? What do the children look like? Can you see the Son of Man in her? How do you feel as you hold this image in the silence that follows? And if you want to jot down something on your service sheet, then do so. It's what the blank spaces can be used for. My song is love unknown, my Saviour's love to me, love to the loveless shown, that they might lovely be. Oh, who am I, that for my sake my Lord should take frail flesh and die? He came from his blessed throne salvation to bestow, but men made strange, and none the longed for Christ would know. But oh, my friend indeed, who at my need his life did spend. Sometimes they strew his way, and his sweet praises sing, resounding all the day, hosannas to their King. Then crucify is all their breath, and for his death they thirst and cry. Why, what hath my Lord done? What makes this rage and spite? He made the lame to run, he gave the blind their sight. Sweet injuries, yet they at these themselves displace, and against him rise. They rise and needs will have my dear Lord made away. A murderer they save, the Prince of Life they slay. Yet cheerful he to suffering goes, that he his foes from thence might free. In life no house, no home, my Lord on earth might have. In death no friendly tomb, but what a stranger gave. What may I say? Heaven was his home, but mine the tomb wherein he lay. Here might I stay and sing, no story so divine. Never was love, dear King, never was grief like thine. This is my friend, in whose sweet praise I all my gaze could gladly spend. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard when a servant girl accosted him. "You were with Jesus, the Galilean," she said. Peter denied it in front of them all. "I do not know what you are talking about." He then went out to the gateway, where another girl, seeing him, said to the people there, "He was with Jesus of Nazareth." Once again he denied it, saying with an oath, I do not know the man." Shortly afterwards, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "You must be one of them. Your accent gives you away." At this he started to curse and declared with an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, a cock crowed. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. O Peter, only a few hours before his denial, he has said, "Everyone else may lose faith because of you, but I never will." Easier to be brave with the Passover wine still bolstering your courage, and you're with your friends. Much harder in the hostile environment of the high priest's courtyard. The silence that follows isn't long enough for us to call to mind all the ways in which we deny our knowledge of Jesus, not just as individuals, but even more so as the church and as the communities to which we belong, whether family, neighborhood, city, country. 10 to 2 cannot come fast enough to conclude the awkwardness that this silence may evoke, but weigh the discomfort of acknowledging how we deny that we know the man against a 3-hour ordeal on the cross. And it's hard to resent the discomfort. But we can take some comfort from Dietrich Bonhoeffer's words. God loves human beings. God loves the world, not an ideal human, but human beings as they are. Not an ideal world, but the real world. What we find repulsive in their opposition to God, what we shrink back from with pain and hostility, namely real human beings, the real world. This is for God the ground of unfathomable love. darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. So now another image to hold. An Afghan who used to work as an interpreter for the British Army and is now staying in a rundown hotel. His children are settled in school, and he's now facing deportation to another part of the country. What does he say to you? Can you see the Son of Man in him? How do you feel as you hold this image in the silence that follows? And if you want to jot something down on your service sheet, then do, because it's what the blank spaces can be used for. and follow me if I but call your name. Will you go where you don't know and never be the same? Will you let your love be shown? Will you let my name be known? Will you let my life be grown in you and you in me? Will you leave yourself behind if I but call your name? Will you care for cruel and kind and never be the same? Will you risk the hostile stare? Should your life attract or scare? Will you let me answer prayer in you and you in me? Will you let the blinded see if I but call your name? Will you set the prisoners free and never be the same? Will you kiss the leper clean and do such as this unseen and admit to what I mean in you and you in me? Will you love the you hide if I but call your name? Will you quell the fear inside and never be the same? Will you use the faith you found to reshape the world around through my sight and touch and sound in you and you in me? Lord, your summons echoes true when you but call my name. Let me turn and follow you and never be the same. In your company I'll go where your love and footsteps show. Thus I'll move and live and grow in you and you in me. Then they led him out to crucify him. A man called Simon from Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they pressed him into service to carry his cross. It's not clear how much of a say Simon of Cyrene had at the point that he carried Jesus' cross. Was he happy to help? Or did he notice a number of Roman soldiers wandering along with nothing in their hands or on their shoulders and think wistfully that this is what it's like to live in an occupied territory? A phrase that the long-suffering used to deploy was that some task was their cross to bear. This was often accompanied by a pained expression looking for the acknowledgement of their martyrdom. Simon's little vignette in the crucifixion story as a reminder of the importance of carrying somebody else's cross, whether that cross is forced upon you or whether it is something that you yourself pick up as a voluntary act. I have a little passage from James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. James Cone, a black American theologian, So the lynching tree was the place where a black person would literally have been lynched, with the words that sound completely shocking to us today and would certainly never appear in full in The Guardian: string the nigger up. In some ways, apologies for using that word, but that would have been the phrase that would have been used. Unfortunately, says James Cone, during the course of 2,000 years of Christian history, this symbol of salvation has been detached from any reference to the ongoing suffering and oppression of human beings, those whom Ignacio Ellacuría, a Salvadorian martyr, called the crucified peoples of history. The cross has been transformed into a harmless, non-offensive ornament that Christians wear around their necks. Rather than reminding us of the cost of discipleship, it has become a form of cheap grace. An easy way to salvation that doesn't force us to confront the power of Christ's message and mission. Until we can see the cross and the lynching tree together, until we can identify Christ with a re-crucified black body hanging from a lynching tree, there can be no genuine understanding of Christian identity and no deliverance from the brutal legacy of slavery and of white supremacy. Welcome to those of you who didn't get my welcome at the beginning of this service. There is plenty of silence within the service. You can use this to reflect on what I have been reading from the Gospels, what I have said, what I have quoted, or wherever you are led. Someone recently emailed me in response to a sermon saying that when St. John Vianney asked an old peasant farmer he had noticed praying at his church before the sacrament, "What do you say to him?" he asked. The man responded, "Nothing. I look at him, and he looks at me." Quieten my noisy, tumultuous thoughts, and grant my brain rest, O Lord. Help me let go of my distractions and my desire to be distracted, to simply sit here with you. And as the silence unsettles my spirit, let the waves of your peace and presence wash over me. Amen. dies away, that never dies away. Within our darkest night, you kindle the fire that never dies away, that never dies away. And now an image to hold in the next period of silence. A prisoner on death row in the United States. Probably as James Cone was, and as those hanged on the lynching tree were, very likely to be black. What does he say to you? What does his face look like? What's his demeanor? Can you see the Son of Man in him? How do you feel as you hold this image in the silence that follows? Father, hear the prayer we offer, not for ease that prayer shall be, but for strength that we may ever live our lives courageously. Not forever in green pastures do we ask our way to be, but the steep and rugged pathways may we tread rejoicingly. Not forever by still waters would we idly rest and stay, but would smite the living fountains from the rocks along our way. Be our strength in hours of weakness, in our wanderings be our guide, through endeavor, failure, danger, Father, be thou at our side. Then they led him out to crucify him. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him drugged wine, but he didn't take it. Then they fastened him to the cross. They shared out his clothes, casting lots to decide what each should have. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him, and the inscription giving the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and the other on his left. The passers-by wagged their heads and jeered at him. "Bravo," they cried, "so you are the man who was to pull down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from the cross." The chief priests and the scribes joined in, jesting with one another. "He saved others," they said, "but he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross. If we see that, we shall believe." Even those who were crucified with him taunted him. At midday, a darkness fell over the whole land, which lasted till 3 in the afternoon. And at 3, Jesus cried aloud, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Hearing this, some of the bystanders said, "Listen, he is calling Elijah." Someone ran and soaked a sponge in sour wine and held it to his lips on the end of a stick. "Let us see," he said, "if Elijah will come to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and died. and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion, who was standing opposite him, saw how he died, he said, "This man must have been a son of God." Did you mean it when you sang that hymn? Those words, "Not forever by in green pastures would we idly rest and stay, not forever by still waters." Every time I sing them, I think, well, a couple of weeks would be nice. And the last half hour could be quite challenging for us. I'm going to read a passage from Charles Eliot, from his book, Praying the Kingdom. He was talking about a discussion that he had had with a nun who specializes in spiritual direction. He says, "She often gives aspirants the exercise of imaginatively attending the scene of the crucifixion. She encourages them to enter deeply into that moment of history, to imagine the sounds, the smells, the light, the feel, the atmosphere, to look deeply into the faces of people standing around the cross, to watch and particularly listen to the Lord as, struggling for breath, he heaves himself into a more erect position on the cross, defying the pain in his feet and wrists to gain a lungful of air." Now, she says, you're there, what do you do? And the extraordinary thing is, she tells me, that almost without exception, men can't take it. They go away. They simply can't stand watching that intensity of suffering. So they slope off. Women can't stand it either, but they're determined to save him. So they fling themselves at the cross to cut him free, or they start rallying the crowds to take on the Roman soldiers. The one thing they can't manage in the face of such evident wretchedness is inactivity. The one person who did manage inactivity in that situation was Mary. She watched from a little way off as her son died. She entered his suffering as only a mother can, and we may assume laid it alongside the conviction that he was no ordinary son. The reader may care to use that scene as meditative material. It would be good to dwell on three aspects. First, Mary doesn't shrink from the horror of it. The blood is real blood. The fighting for breath is a desperate struggle for survival. And the sense of abandonment is total. Second, she stays, and stays inactive, practically immobile. She doesn't try to organize a coup or lead a demonstration or abuse the cohort of soldiers. She stays and takes in the horror and the suffering. And third, we may assume that she is offering the whole event to God as she experiences it, the whole event. She's aware of the hypocrisy of the crowd, some of whom were healed by Jesus. She's aware of the self-righteousness of the Pharisees and the religious establishment. She's aware of the callousness of the soldiers. And she's all too aware of the timidity and gutlessness of the disciples, and of how that, above all else, hurts us, her Son. And she offers all of that to God, quietly, silently, inwardly, while she is lacerated with all the emotion of a mother, watching a favored son, a son with the finger of God on him, die the cruelest death. If we can enter into Mary's experience, we're beginning to know what prayer for the kingdom involves. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. We actually had an interesting discussion at breakfast this morning because our 4-year-old granddaughter had had a nightmare about Jesus after the Easter service at the first school that she attends in Somerset. And apparently it had been quite toned down. I haven't yet processed that, I must admit, but what do we say to children appropriately about the crucifixion? I say that because the next reading that I'm going to give you, this final image, is something that could well create a nightmare, although you may have heard it before. As I have said, we've got used to images of the crucifixion, but this is a story you may have heard from Elie Wiesel, from his time in Auschwitz. To hang a child in front of thousands of onlookers was not a small matter. The head of the camp read the verdict. All eyes were on the child. He was pale, almost calm, but he was biting his lips as he stood in the shadow of the gallows. This time, the Lager Capo, the superintendent of the concentration camp, refused to act as executioner. 3 SS took his place. The 3 condemned prisoners together stepped onto the chairs in unison. The nooses were placed around their necks. "Long live liberty," shouted the 2 men. But the boy was silent. "Where is merciful God? Where is he?" someone behind me was asking. At the signal, the 3 chairs were tipped over. Total silence in the camp. On the horizon, the sun was setting. Then came the march past the victims. The 2 men were no longer alive. Their tongues were hanging out, swollen and bluish. But the 3rd rope was still moving. The child, too light. was still breathing. And so he remained for more than half an hour, lingering between life and death, writhing before our eyes, and we were forced to look at him at close range. He was still alive when I passed him. His tongue was still red, his eyes not yet extinguished. Behind me, I heard the same man asking, "For God's sake, where is God?" And from within me, I heard a voice answer, "Where is he? This is where, hanging here from this gallows." This is such a disturbing image that I nearly discarded it. And when I revisit it, my heart is broken, just as God's heart was broken in Auschwitz, and as it is breaking in so many people today, as his Son is crucified again and again. As we wait for the moment that the Son of Man's heart stopped beating, this final image may lead us to turn away or to rush forward and try and cut the boy down. Or we may enter into Mary's experience. I end with some words from a Lent book that the church I attend has been studying, Paul Dominiac's The Falling of Dusk. With his last breath, Jesus breathes out the Trinitarian life of God into our lungs. Let us then join Jesus in his last words of the cross and say together, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit."